My father had been stealing from my 84-year-old grandmother for 2 years. I knew. I'd been building the case, and then he made one mistake. He sent me an email telling me not to show up. Chapter 1. Not invited. I read the email 3 times, not because I didn't understand it the first time. I understood it perfectly. I read it 3 times because I wanted to make sure I felt nothing, and by the 3rd time, I didn't. The subject line was Lauren's wedding, final arrangements. My father had CC'd my mother, Lauren, and Ethan's parents. I was not on the original recipient list. I was forwarded the message by my mother, probably by accident, probably because she panicked, and probably because she didn't tell my father she did it. The relevant paragraph was the 4th one down. Chloe, I've given this considerable thought and discussed it with your mother. We've decided it's best that you not attend. The guest list reflects the image we want to present, and given recent tensions, your presence would create unnecessary distraction. We hope you understand this is not personal. It is practical. Please respect our decision and do not contact Lauren directly about this matter. Don't come! You'll ruin everything! That last line wasn't in the email. That was just the translation. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it standing up. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the Alaska Airlines website and booked a flight from LAX to Kahului, Maui. Departing Thursday, returning open-ended. People who know me from work would not be surprised by this. I'm an APS investigator for Los Angeles County Adult Protective Services. My job is to walk into situations where someone is being hurt, financially, physically, emotionally, usually by someone they trust, usually by someone they love, and I have to stay calm enough to gather evidence while the family stands around me lying to my face. I'm good at it. I've been doing it for 6 years. The skill set, it turns out, transferred from my childhood without much adjustment. My father is Richard Bennett, retired cardiologist, 3rd-generation California money, though he prefers to let people assume it's self-made. He has good posture, a firm handshake, and the particular confidence of a man who has never once in his life been told he was wrong by someone whose opinion he respected. He is 67 years old, and he has controlled every significant financial decision in our family since before I was born. My mother, Diane, is 58. She used to manage a private school. She is smart, organized, and completely dependent on my father in the ways that matter. She picks her battles. She has never once picked me. Lauren is 27. She runs something called LuxGlow Media, LLC, a lifestyle brand, a newsletter, a product line, a presence. She is blonde, photogenic, and very good at making her life look like something you should want. Ethan Walsh, her fiancé, is a corporate attorney who spent the first year of their relationship being photographed at charity events. They are getting married at a resort in Maui at the end of the month, and the wedding will be documented extensively for content purposes. I am 31. I am a social worker who investigates elder abuse. I was married for 2 years to a man who was not a bad person, but who could not figure out how to be married to someone who brought her work home the way I did. The divorce was civil. My father used it as evidence of a pattern. The pattern, according to him, is that I make choices that reflect poorly on the family. Choosing APS over the law career he mapped out for me. Marrying someone he didn't approve of. Getting divorced. Living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Palms instead of somewhere with a doorman. Every decision I have ever made that wasn't the decision he would have made has been filed, by him, under the category of failure. What he doesn't know is that I've been building a file of my own. It started 22 months ago with a phone call from my grandmother. Eleanor Hayes, my mother's mother. She's 84, sharp in the ways that count, and she has lived at Silver Cove Senior Living in Maui since 2021, after a fall that scared everyone badly enough that she agreed to the move. She had asked me once, years earlier, to be the person she called if something felt wrong. She said she trusted me because I was the only one in the family who had never tried to get something from her. The call lasted 4 minutes. Her voice was different, not confused, not frail, but careful. Monitored was the word that came to mind. She said she was fine. She said she just wanted to hear my voice. Then, right before she hung up, she said, very quietly, "I signed something, Chloe. I don't remember what it was. I know what that means. I've heard it before. Not from a grandmother, but from strangers, from the clients I walk into facilities to see, The ones whose families have already started moving money before anyone asks any questions. The careful voice. The sentence that sounds like nothing but means everything. I started with what I could pull without triggering anything. Public records, trust documents, property filings. Then I reached out to a contact I have in the Hawaii APS office, Daniel Brooks, who agreed to do a wellness check as a courtesy and keep it quiet. What he came back with was enough to make me stop eating for about a day. My grandmother has a revocable living trust worth approximately $620,000. It was set up to transfer to me upon her death, with provisions for her care in the interim. 18 months ago, my father was listed as successor trustee following a competency review. A review that, from what I could find, was conducted by a single physician and not contested by anyone. Since then, approximately $385,000 has been withdrawn from that trust in increments of $20,000 to $40,000, documented as asset management expenses and care coordination fees. There is no care coordination company on record. There are, however, wire transfers to an LLC registered in Nevada 18 months ago that shares a mailing address with LuxGlow Media. I carry a canvas tote bag that I've had since my second year at USC. On Thursday morning, I packed it with my laptop, a portable hard drive, a voice recorder, printed copies of every bank statement and trust document I had sourced over 22 months, and a folder from Michael Carter, an elder law attorney in Santa Barbara who has been advising me quietly for the last 4 months. I did not pack a dress appropriate for a wedding. At the gate, waiting to board, I got a text from my mother. It said, "Please don't do this." I didn't respond. I put my phone in my bag and picked up the tote and got in line. My family thinks I'm the one who got left behind, the one who couldn't keep up, couldn't fit in, couldn't be what they needed. They have spent 31 years making sure I understood that clearly. They didn't understand that I had been watching them for nearly 2 years, and I was not flying to Maui for a wedding. Chapter 2, The Night Call. 18 months before I booked that flight, I was asleep when my phone rang at 12:47 in the morning. I almost didn't pick up. The number was a 808 area code, Hawaii, and I didn't recognize it. I let it ring to 4, then something made me answer. I don't know what. Instinct, maybe, or the particular alertness that comes from years of being on call for people who have no one else to contact. "Chloe." The voice was low, almost a whisper. "Grandma?" I sat up. "Is that you?" "I don't have much time." She wasn't confused. That was the first thing I clocked. Her voice was thin and careful, but she was tracking. "They check the phones here. One of the nurses let me use hers." Eleanor Hayes is not a woman who dramatizes. She taught high school English for 34 years in Santa Barbara. She raised my mother largely on her own after my grandfather's stroke. She is the kind of person who, when something is wrong, states it plainly and expects you to respond in kind. "Tell me what's happening," I said. "They moved me," she said. "Richard arranged it. He said the facility in Santa Barbara wasn't equipped for my needs. He said the doctors recommended the transition." She paused. "I didn't speak to any doctors, Chloe. I signed something. I'm not sure what it was." That was the second time I'd heard her say that. The first was the call 6 weeks earlier that I had written off as confusion. I wasn't writing it off anymore. "Have you been able to talk to Mom?" "Your mother calls on Sundays. Richard is usually there when she does." Another pause. "He's been very involved." I knew what I was hearing. I hear it in my work more often than most people would want to believe. The isolation first, move the person somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere their existing network can't easily reach. Then the information control, monitor the calls, manage the narrative, make sure nothing gets out that hasn't been approved. Then the label. Not competent, not reliable, too confused to be believed. It's a system. It works because the people running it understand that the target's credibility is the only real threat to them, and they dismantle it methodically before anyone thinks to ask questions. "Grandma, I need to ask you something directly. The trust. The one you and Grandpa set up." A silence. Then, "You know about it." "I know it exists. I don't know what's happened to it." She took a breath. "Your grandfather and I set it up in 2009, after he got sick the second time. We wanted things to be clear." She was speaking quietly but precisely. We named you as the primary beneficiary. Not your mother, not Lauren. You, because you were the only one who never asked us for money. The only one who didn't change when there was money involved. I didn't say anything. It's worth somewhere around 600,000, she said. Maybe more, with the property. Richard knows the number. He's known for years. Has he made any changes to the trust? He told me I needed to update the management structure, that at my age, I shouldn't be handling the administrative side. He had papers. A physician had signed something, he said, confirming I needed support with financial decisions. Her voice dropped further. I didn't choose that physician, Chloe. I don't remember meeting him. There it was. A competency determination from a single evaluator, not independently verified, used to install my father as successor trustee. It was the kind of move that looks like responsible estate planning from the outside, and looks like something else entirely when you know what to look for. The money, I said. Has he mentioned withdrawals? Expenses? He says there are management fees, care coordination. He brings documents when he visits, explains them very quickly, and asks me to sign. Sometimes I remember signing. Sometimes I'm not sure. She stopped. Last month I asked him what the balance was. He told me not to worry about it. We talked for 11 more minutes before she said the nurse needed the phone back. Before she hung up, she said, "That money was supposed to be yours, Chloe. He knows that, and he told me, he actually said this, that you hadn't earned it, that you'd made choices that disqualified you." I wrote that down word for word after we hung up. Over the next 6 weeks, I built the timeline the only way I know how, methodically. I pulled every public record I could access without triggering a formal investigation. Property filings, trust registration documents, the competency assessment that had been filed with the county. I called Daniel Brooks, an APS investigator I'd worked with during a joint case 2 years earlier, now based in Honolulu. I told him I had a family member at Silver Cove Senior living in Maui, and I had concerns about isolation and financial management. He agreed to do an unofficial wellness check. He called me back in 4 days and said my grandmother seemed physically healthy, but that the facility had a notation in her file, placed there by the family contact, my father, flagging her as cognitively unreliable and recommending that staff defer to the family representative for all major communications. That notation had been added 3 months before she called me. It was Nina Alvarez, a nurse at Silver Cove, who made the covert calls possible. She had been at the facility for 7 years. She was the one who had handed Eleanor the phone that first night. I didn't know her name yet, but I would learn it later. Learn that she had watched my father arrive 4 times in 3 months, always with a folder, always sitting with Eleanor in the common room for exactly long enough to get a signature, always leaving before the administrator came on shift. Nina had said nothing because she had 2 kids and a mortgage, and the facility director was the one who scheduled her hours. I understood that calculation. I didn't blame her for it. But she kept lending Eleanor her phone, and that mattered. The calls came every 2 to 3 weeks, always late, always short. Eleanor told me what she could remember. I cross-referenced the dates against the bank records I was slowly assembling through Michael Carter, an elder law attorney in Santa Barbara, whom I had contacted after the 3rd call. Michael had seen this structure before. He called it trustee capture, the gradual, documented repositioning of a trustee who exploits a competency gray area to gain uncontested control of assets. The withdrawals totaled $385,000, pulled in increments of $20,000 to $40,000 across 14 months, each one logged as asset management or care coordination. The destination, traced through an intermediate account, was an LLC registered in Nevada, incorporated 18 months ago, mailing address in Encino, California. Luxglow Media, LLC. Lauren had announced the family investment in an Instagram post the previous spring. She called it, "A vote of confidence from the people who believe in me most." The post got 42,000 likes. I screenshotted it and added it to the file. Around that same time, I got a text from Rachel Kim, my mother's cousin's daughter, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. It said, "Hey, random, did Lauren get a big investment or something? She's been on a whole different level lately. New studio, new team, flew to Paris for a collab. Just seems fast." I wrote back, I'm not sure. Why? She said. No reason, just noticed. Rachel had always been observant. It was one of the things the family didn't give her credit for. I opened a new folder on my desktop that night. I labeled it clearly, the way I label every case I work. Name of the subject. Name of the responsible party. Status, active. Case, Eleanor Hayes. Suspected financial exploitation. Primary subject, Richard Bennett. I had spent my entire life being told I was the problem in my family. The one who asked too many questions, pushed too hard, refused to accept the version of events everyone else agreed to perform. For the first time, I understood that those were not flaws. They were qualifications. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the investigator, and I had been building this case for longer than any of them knew. Chapter 3. The Plan. Michael Carter had been practicing elder law in Santa Barbara for 26 years, and he had the particular energy of someone who had stopped being surprised by people a long time ago. He reviewed everything I sent him, the trust documents, the withdrawal records, the competency filing, the LLC registration, and called me back on a Tuesday afternoon in a tone that was measured and precise and not especially comforting. What your father has done, he said, is position himself as successor trustee using a competency determination that, based on what you've sent me, would not survive independent scrutiny. The withdrawals are structured to avoid automatic reporting thresholds. The destination LLC has a paper trail that's thin but traceable. This is fiduciary abuse. Textbook. Can we reverse it? The withdrawals are going to be difficult. Once money moves through an intermediary entity, recovery depends on cooperation or litigation, and both take time. He paused. What concerns me more right now is the house. The house was a 4-bedroom property in Santa Barbara that Eleanor and my grandfather had bought in 1987. Current assessed value, approximately $720,000. It was held inside the trust, still titled in Eleanor's name, and it was the largest single asset remaining. Everything else, the liquid accounts, the investment positions, had been drawn down significantly. The house was what was left. If your father moves to transfer that property, Michael said, and he gets your grandmother to sign a deed transfer or a trust amendment in favor of another party, that is significantly harder to unwind. Real property conveyance with a signature from the grantor, even a questionable one, creates a legal presumption that has to be actively overcome. Courts don't like reversing real estate transactions. He's going to do it at the wedding, I said. I had figured this out 2 weeks earlier when Rachel sent me the rehearsal schedule. Lauren and Ethan's wedding was a 3-day event at a resort on Maui's South Shore. Richard and Diane were arriving Wednesday. The ceremony was Saturday afternoon. The reception ran through Sunday brunch. Silver Cove Senior Living was 40 minutes from the resort by car. The itinerary Rachel forwarded, she had been CC'd on the family logistics email chain, included a notation I almost missed. Friday 10 a.m., R plus attorney, Silver Cove, paperwork RE, estate planning. One line. Sandwiched between the rehearsal dinner and the florist confirmation. Estate planning, at a memory care facility, the day before a wedding. With an attorney I had not been able to identify yet. He's bringing someone to get her signature, I told Michael. Probably framed as routine trust administration. If she signs a deed transfer or a trust amendment removing me and adding Lauren or Ethan as beneficiary, the house is gone. Michael was quiet for a moment. Then you need to move before Friday. That was when I called Daniel. Daniel Brooks had been with Hawaii APS for 11 years. He was methodical and careful, and he understood the line between what he could do officially and what he could support informally. When I laid out what I had, he listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "You know I can't open a formal case on your timeline. The intake process alone takes 2 weeks minimum. I'm not asking for a formal case. I'm asking you to be present." "Present how?" "I need to get to her on Saturday. Wedding day. Richard and Diane will be at the resort from early afternoon. The ceremony starts at 4. Nina Alvarez, the nurse on her wing, has already confirmed she's working the day shift. Staffing at the facility drops on weekends, especially when there's nothing scheduled. If I come in as a family member, which I am, and request a visit, they have no grounds to deny me. Eleanor is not under guardianship. She has not been legally adjudicated incompetent. My father put a notation in her file, but a notation is not a court order. Daniel said, "And you want me there because if something goes wrong, you need a witness with credentials. I need someone who can identify himself as an APS investigator if the facility pushes back. And I need someone who understands how to document a voluntary testimony." He was quiet for a few seconds. "What's your window?" 15 to 20 minutes. Enough for a recorded statement. Her identifying herself, stating the date, confirming she understands what's being recorded, and describing in her own words what has happened with the trust. And if she's not lucid in that window? I had thought about this more than I wanted to admit. Eleanor's clarity was not consistent. Some days she was sharp. Other days, the medication adjustments the facility had made since my father became her primary contact left her slower, more passive. Nina had told me, through a series of careful texts, that Eleanor's clearer periods tended to be late morning and early afternoon, before the evening medication cycle. "Saturday ceremony is at 4, I said. "We go in at 1. That's her window." "Chloe," Daniel's voice was even, "if she's not clear, we can't use the statement. And if the facility reports the visit to your father before we're done, the whole thing collapses. There is no second attempt after this. He'll lock it down completely. I know. I want to make sure you actually know. This is not a case where you regroup and try again next month. If this doesn't work Saturday, he gets the signature Friday, transfers the house, and by the time any legal challenge is viable, the asset is encumbered 3 layers deep." "I know," I said again. "That's why I'm not going to let it not work." Rachel had been texting me in fragments for 2 weeks. Small things. A comment Lauren made about restructuring the trust situation. A conversation she overheard between Richard and Ethan about protecting the asset from exposure. She didn't fully understand what she was passing along, but she understood that something was wrong, and she had decided quietly to be useful. I was careful not to tell her more than she needed to know. I didn't want her exposed. My mother called me the Wednesday before I flew out. She sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with the time of day. "Your father is very focused on this weekend going well," she said. "I'm sure he is." "Chloe," a pause. "He's done a lot to get everything in order. I just want you to know that." I didn't know exactly what she meant by that. I wasn't sure she did either. But there was something in her voice, not guilt exactly, but the sound of someone who has been performing a role for so long that they've started to feel the weight of the costume. "I understand, Mom," I said. She hung up without saying goodbye, which was unusual even for her. 2 days before I flew out, I received an email from my father. The subject line was blank. The body contained 1 paragraph. "I've been informed you may be planning to attend this weekend despite our previous communication. I want to be unambiguous. Your presence is not welcome at any event associated with Lauren's wedding, including any facility or property where family members will be present. This is your final notice. If you disregard this, I will take it as confirmation that you have chosen to permanently remove yourself from this family's consideration. Don't even think about showing up." I read it once, then I typed back 4 words. "I understand. Thank you." I sent it, closed the laptop, and finished packing my bag. I did understand. I understood exactly what he was doing and exactly what he stood to lose if I walked through that door on Saturday. I understood that he had spent 18 months building something he believed was airtight, and that he had not once considered that the daughter he'd written off might have spent the same 18 months building something of her own. I understood everything, and I was getting on that plane. Chapter 4. Wedding Day. I landed in Kahului at 9:15 Saturday morning. The air hit me the moment I stepped off the jetway. Warm, salt-edged, the kind of weather that makes everything feel like it should be fine. It wasn't lost on me that somewhere on the South Shore, 40 minutes away, florists were setting up chairs and my sister was getting her hair done, and my father was probably reviewing the day's schedule the way he reviewed everything, methodically and without sentiment. Daniel picked me up outside baggage claim. He had a rental, a plain gray sedan, and a folder on the back seat that he had already organized. We didn't talk much on the drive. We had covered everything by phone. What was left was execution. Nina had texted me at 7:48 that morning. Something happened. They moved her. Wing C, room 12. Ask for the charge nurse. Say your immediate family. Don't mention me. Wing C was the restricted access wing, primarily residents with advanced cognitive decline, requiring higher supervision. Eleanor had been in Wing B since she arrived, assisted living, semi-independent. Moving her to Wing C required either a physician order or a family directive. I already knew which one it was. Daniel pulled into the facility parking lot at 12:50. We had 10 minutes before our planned entry time. He looked at me and said, "You ready?" "Yes." "If they push back on Wing C access, let me handle it. I'll identify myself and reference the wellness concern protocol. That buys us time without triggering a formal hold." "Okay." "And Chloe, if she's not clear, she'll be clear," I said. I didn't say it to reassure him. I said it because I needed it to be true. The charge nurse on Wing C was a heavy-set woman in her 50s named Patrice, who looked at my ID and then at Daniel's credentials, and did the mental calculation that I have seen many facility staff do when a situation presents itself that is slightly outside the normal flow of a Saturday afternoon. She was not obstructive. She was cautious, which is different. "Mrs. Hayes had a difficult night," she said. The family contact requested she be moved for additional monitoring. "The family contact being Richard Bennett," Daniel said. "Yes." "I'm also family," I said. "I'm her granddaughter. Eleanor Hayes does not have a legal guardian and has not been adjudicated incompetent by any court. I have the right to visit her." Patrice looked at Daniel's badge again. Then she said, "Room 12. 15 minutes." The room was smaller than her previous one. Eleanor was sitting up in the bed when we came in, which was the first good sign. The second was that she looked at me and said my name before I reached the foot of the bed. "Chloe." Her voice was thin, but her eyes were tracking. Present. "You came." I said I would. She looked at Daniel. "Who is this?" "His name is Daniel Brooks. He works for Adult Protective Services. He's here to help." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. One short nod, the way she used to nod when a student gave her the right answer. She was smaller than the last time I had seen her in person, 2 years ago at Christmas. Her hands, folded on the blanket, looked fragile in a way I wasn't prepared for, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "They moved me last night," she said. "Richard called the facility Thursday. He told them I had become agitated and was a fall risk. I wasn't agitated. I asked him to explain a document he wanted me to sign, and he raised his voice at me." She paused. "That was the agitation." "What document?" I asked. "Something about the house. He said it was a trust update, a formality. He had an attorney with him, someone I didn't recognize. He kept saying it would only take a minute." She looked down at her hands. "I told him I wanted to read it first. I told him I wanted my own attorney to look at it. He said there wasn't time, that it needed to be done before the wedding weekend for tax purposes." A short exhale. "I've been a grown woman for 60 years. I know when someone is rushing me through something." "Did you sign it?" "No." She looked up. He got very angry. Not loudly. Richard doesn't do things loudly, but the kind of angry where the temperature in the room changes. She was quiet for a second. That was when I knew for certain. You can tell yourself a story about someone for a long time. You can say they mean well, they're just managing things, they're under stress. But when you say no, and they look at you the way he looked at me... She stopped. I knew. I had my phone in my hand. I looked at her and said, "I need to record this. A video. You stating what you've just told me, in your own words. It will be used as part of a legal case." She didn't hesitate. "All right." I took one breath. I thought briefly about what pressing record meant. Not for the case, I was clear on that, but for everything else. The version of family that gets preserved in photographs. The mythology of the Bennets, functional and successful, and fine. Once I pressed record, that version was finished. There was no walking it back. I pressed record. "Please state your name and today's date," I said. "My name is Eleanor Ruth Hayes. Today is..." She looked at Daniel. "April 12th, he said. 2025. April 12th, 2025. "And you understand that this is being recorded?" "Yes, I understand." "Can you describe, in your own words, what has happened with your living trust over the past 18 months? She did. She was clear and sequential, and she did not editorialize. She named my father by his full name. She described the competency evaluation she had not consented to, the documents she had signed without understanding their contents, the withdrawals she had been told were routine management. She said she had not authorized the transfer of any funds to any business entity. She said she had not been given the opportunity to consult independent counsel. She said she had asked, multiple times, to speak with me, and had been told I was not an appropriate contact, given family dynamics. Then she said, "Richard is my son-in-law. I have known him for 35 years. I trusted him with this because he told me no one else could manage it properly. He told me Chloe was too emotional, too unstable, that she would waste it." She looked directly at the camera. I trusted him, and he used that. The timestamp on the recording was 1:17 p.m. We had been in the room for 23 minutes. Daniel stepped out to speak with Patrice about discharge documentation. Eleanor had the legal right to leave. She was not on a medical hold. She was not under guardianship. Patrice made 2 phone calls that I was not privy to, and then she came back and said she needed a form signed and a destination logged. I gave her Michael Carter's office address in Santa Barbara as the destination. I signed as accompanying family member. We were in the parking lot by 1:44. My phone had been buzzing since 1:31. I looked at it when we reached the car. My father: "I've been informed you are at the facility. What you are doing is interference with legally authorized care arrangements. If you remove her, I will contact law enforcement and report a kidnapping." My mother, 3 messages. "Chloe, please. Please don't do this today. Call me." Lauren, 1 message, all caps. "Are you serious, right now? Today, of all days?" I typed 1 response, sent it to all 3 threads. "She's safe. She's not coming back." I put the phone in my bag and got in the car. Eleanor was in the back seat. Daniel pulled out of the lot and onto the main road heading north. I looked back once, at the facility entrance, at the sign above the door, at the row of windows facing the parking lot. Then I faced forward and didn't look back again. Chapter 5. Counterplay. We stayed at a Holiday Inn Express 12 miles from Silver Cove. It was not a remarkable hotel. That was the point. I had booked it under my name 3 days earlier, paid cash at check-in, and told no one except Daniel and Michael where we were. Eleanor slept for most of the afternoon and through the night. I sat at the small desk by the window and worked. Michael had been on standby since noon, and I called him at 2:15 with confirmation that we had Eleanor, that the video was clean, and that we needed to move on the legal filings first thing Sunday morning. "I'll have the protective order petition drafted tonight," he said, "and I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze trust account activity. We need a judge to sign off, but I have a contact in Santa Barbara Superior Court who handles weekend emergency filings. It won't be fast, but it'll be faster than normal." "How long?" "If everything goes cleanly, freeze order by Monday afternoon. Protective order, maybe Tuesday. He's going to move before that." "I know. That's why the video matters. It establishes her capacity and her intent on record before he can get to a physician to file a new competency claim." Michael paused. "You did well today, Chloe. The recording is going to hold." I thanked him and hung up and stared at the wall for a while. My phone had gone quiet around 9 p.m. Saturday, which concerned me more than the messages had. Silence from my father didn't mean he had stopped. It meant he had shifted to a different channel. I found out which channel at 7:40 Sunday morning when someone knocked on the hotel room door. 2 officers from the Maui Police Department. Polite, professional, clearly not thrilled to be there. One of them explained that they had received a report of an elderly woman being removed from a care facility without authorization by a family member, and that the reporting party had used the word kidnapping. I had anticipated this. I had the folder ready. My grandmother is Eleanor Ruth Hayes, I said. She is 84 years old. She does not have a legal guardian, and she has not been adjudicated incompetent by any court in the state of Hawaii or California. I am her granddaughter. I accompanied her out of Silver Cove Senior Living yesterday afternoon of her own free will, documented by facility discharge paperwork signed by the charge nurse on duty. I handed the first officer the discharge form. I also have a recorded video statement made by Mrs. Hayes yesterday at approximately 1:17 p.m., prior to departure, in which she states clearly that she wished to leave, that she was not under any medical hold, and that she was making the decision voluntarily. The officer took the folder. He and his partner stepped into the hallway and spent 11 minutes reviewing the documents, and I assumed making calls. When he came back, he said, "Is Mrs. Hayes available to speak with us briefly?" I checked with Eleanor first. She said yes. She spoke with them for 6 minutes. She was clear, direct, and told them she had left voluntarily and did not wish to return to the facility. She told them her son-in-law had been managing her finances without her full understanding, and that she had asked her granddaughter for help. The officers left without taking any action. Before he walked out, the first one looked at me and said, "You might want to get an attorney if you don't already have one." "I have two," I said. Richard's kidnapping claim went nowhere because there was nothing to support it. Eleanor was a competent adult who had discharged herself from a voluntary care placement. That he had framed her removal as a crime said more about his position than mine, but the guardianship petition was a different matter. Michael called me at 10:30 to tell me my father had filed an emergency petition for a legal guardianship of Eleanor in Maui Family Court, citing deteriorating cognitive function and the need for protective oversight. "He's trying to get a judge to hand him legal authority before our freeze order goes through," Michael said. "Can he?" "Not easily and not quickly, now that we have the video and the discharge documentation. An emergency guardianship requires clear evidence of incapacity and immediate risk of harm. His petition is going to run directly into our filing. It becomes a contested matter, and contested guardianship petitions don't get resolved over a weekend." He paused. He overplayed it. The petition actually helps us because it creates a formal legal record in which his claim of her incapacity is directly contradicted by her own recorded testimony from the same day. Rachel texted me Sunday afternoon. She had screenshotted a thread from the extended family group chat, the one I had never been added to, where Uncle Mark had asked directly why Richard had moved Eleanor to the restricted wing the night before the wedding. Lauren had responded defensively. Ethan had said nothing. 2 cousins I barely knew had started asking questions that Richard had not answered. The thread had apparently gone quiet after that, but Rachel said the mood had shifted. People were starting to ask each other privately what was actually going on with Eleanor's finances. I didn't respond to the chat. I didn't need to. The questions were already there. On Monday morning, Daniel called me. He had opened a formal APS investigation the previous day and had spent Sunday evening reviewing the financial documentation I had compiled over the previous 18 months, alongside the bank records he had been able to pull through official channels. He told me the wire transfer pattern was cleaner than he had expected. The money moved from Eleanor's trust account to an intermediary account registered to a holding company in Nevada, and from there to Luxglow Media, LLC, in 12 separate transactions over 14 months. The amounts, the timing, the account structure, it was documented clearly enough that he was referring the case to the Honolulu field office and simultaneously flagging it for the DA's Economic Crimes Unit in Los Angeles. "Once the DA's office picks it up, it's out of both our hands," he said. "I know. Your father is going to need a very good criminal attorney, not an estate attorney, a criminal one." Lauren's brand situation unraveled quickly, and without any help from me. A finance blogger with a moderately large following had noticed that Luxglow Media's disclosed investor list didn't include any institutional names, and posted a thread asking where a 2-year-old lifestyle startup had gotten the capital to expand as fast as it had. The comments filled in their own blanks. By Monday afternoon, 2 brand partners had quietly removed Lauren's affiliate links from their platforms. By Tuesday, a third had issued a statement saying they were reviewing their partnership arrangements. Lauren posted a story saying she was taking a step back from content for personal reasons. It got 40,000 views and mostly skeptical comments. I didn't watch it more than once. Diane called me Monday evening. She had flown back to Los Angeles Sunday night, separately from Richard. She said she was at the house and that Richard had not come home yet, and she didn't know where he was staying. I didn't know all of it, she said. I let that sit for a moment. What did you know? A long pause. I knew he was involved in managing Eleanor's finances. I knew there were distributions being made. He told me it was all properly documented. He told me Eleanor had agreed to everything. Another pause. I didn't ask enough questions. I know that. The DA's office is going to want to talk to you. I know. Her voice was flat, exhausted. My attorney told me the same thing. I'm going to cooperate. I need you to know that I'm going to cooperate. I didn't tell her that her cooperation now, after everything, was the minimum. I also didn't tell her that it was too late to matter to me personally. Those were conversations for another time, or possibly never. What mattered in that moment was that her cooperation would strengthen the case, and the case was what I was focused on. Then cooperate, I said. Tell them what you knew, and when you knew it. Don't protect him. She said she wouldn't. I believed her, partially. By Tuesday morning, Michael had confirmation that the trust account freeze had been granted by the Santa Barbara Superior Court. No further withdrawals could be processed. The remaining balance, approximately $235,000, after what had been moved, was locked pending the outcome of the case. The house was still titled in Eleanor's name, which meant the deed transfer my father had been attempting to execute before the wedding had not gone through. The asset was intact. We flew back to Los Angeles on Tuesday afternoon. I booked 2 seats, window and aisle, and Eleanor took the window. She looked out at the ocean for a long time as we lifted off the island, and then she looked at me and said, "What happens now?" "Now the lawyers do their jobs," I said. "And we do ours." "Which is?" "We make sure you're somewhere safe. We make sure you have people around you who are actually there for you." I looked at her. "And we make sure no one gets to decide what you're capable of ever again." She nodded. The same short nod. Then she turned back to the window. The clouds closed over the island below us, and Maui disappeared, and we flew west toward the coast. Chapter 6. 1 week later. The first morning back, Eleanor asked me if I had any Earl Grey. I didn't, so I drove to the grocery store at 7 a.m. and bought 3 boxes. That became the routine. Tea at 7, breakfast around 8, the news on low in the background while she read, and I worked from the kitchen table. My apartment was not designed for 2 people. It was designed for 1 person who didn't spend much time at home. We made it work. She slept better than I expected. The first 2 nights she woke up disoriented, unsure for a moment where she was, and I would hear her and come out and sit with her until she settled. By the 4th night she slept through. By the 6th she told me the quiet was helping her think more clearly, that Silver Cove had been loud in ways she hadn't fully registered until she was out of it. Intercoms, rotating staff, the particular institutional hum of a place that never fully powers down. I noticed she was sharper in the mornings than she had been in the facility. Not dramatically, not in a way I could prove without a medical evaluation, but in the way she tracked conversations, remembered details, connected things. She asked me once to explain the trust structure to her from the beginning, the legal mechanics of what my father had done, and she listened without interrupting, and at the end asked 3 specific questions that Michael Carter, when I relayed them to him, said were exactly the right questions. "She understands what happened to her," he said. "She always did," I told him. "They just needed her not to." On Thursday, 8 days after we landed in Los Angeles, my phone showed a text from my mother. I had not blocked her, which was a decision I had made deliberately, and not without some internal back and forth. The message said, "What did you do?" Not a question. A statement delivered in the format of a question, which was a very Diane Bennett mode of communication. What she meant was, "Look at what you've caused." What she meant was, "This is your fault." What she meant was the same thing she had always meant, which was that the disruption of the family's surface was the offense, regardless of what lived underneath it. I set the phone down and finished my coffee. For 31 years, a message like that would have produced something in me. Guilt, defensiveness, the immediate impulse to explain myself, to manage her reaction, to find some way to make the discomfort smaller so that everyone could go back to pretending. I sat there and waited for that impulse, and it didn't come. It wasn't that I had stopped caring about my mother. It was something quieter than that. It was just the absence of the old machinery. I picked the phone back up and typed, "I told the truth." I sent it and put the phone face down on the table. The legal situation was moving the way legal situations move, which is to say slowly and with a great deal of documentation. Richard had retained a criminal defense attorney, which confirmed that the DA's Economic Crimes Unit had made contact. Michael told me the guardianship petition had been formally withdrawn. My father's attorney had apparently advised him that pursuing it while under criminal investigation was not a viable strategy. The trust freeze remained in place. The $235,000 in remaining assets was secure. The house in Santa Barbara was still in Eleanor's name. The deed transfer my father had been attempting to execute had never been completed. Eleanor, working with Michael, had begun the process of updating the trust documentation to remove my father as successor trustee and install an independent professional fiduciary instead. She had also requested a formal cognitive evaluation from a geriatric specialist of her own choosing, not because there was any legal requirement to do so, but because she said she wanted it on record that the previous determination had been obtained under circumstances she had not consented to. Lauren had not contacted me. Her most recent post, 10 days after we returned, was a neutral lifestyle photograph with no caption. The comments were a mix of support and questions she wasn't answering. 2 of her remaining brand partnerships had gone quiet. Rachel had told me that Ethan's family was asking questions about LuxGlow Media's financials as part of what was apparently becoming a more complicated post-wedding financial conversation. I had no insight into their marriage and didn't want any. That was not my case. Rachel herself had texted to say she was glad Eleanor was okay. I thanked her and meant it. She had taken a risk passing information to me over those months, and she had done it without asking for anything in return. I told her that when the time was right, I would explain more of it to her. She said she wasn't in a rush. Diane had sent 4 more messages over the week. I had read them all. They ranged from accusatory to pleading to something that almost approximated remorse, though she never said directly that she was sorry, which I thought was probably as much honesty as she was capable of at this stage. Her attorney had, according to Michael, indicated that she was cooperating with investigators. What she had known, and when would be sorted out by people whose job it was to sort that out. It was not my job anymore. On Friday evening, Eleanor and I were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. She had made the tea this time. She was looking at the window in the way she sometimes did in the evenings, not at anything specific, just looking. She said, "I've been thinking about something." "Okay." "When you came to the facility, I've been thinking about what made you do it. Not the legal part, I understand that. The personal part." She looked at me. "You didn't come because of the money." "No, I know you didn't. That's what I told your grandfather years ago, when we wrote the trust the way we did. I told him, Chloe won't come for the money. She'll come if we need her." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I think I had it slightly wrong, though. I thought you came to rescue me." "I did, partly. Maybe, but I've been watching you this week. The way you work, the way you move through things, and I think what you actually did was stop letting them tell you who you were." She set the mug down. "You didn't come for me, Chloe. You came for yourself. And I happened to be there." I didn't answer right away. I looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, at the ring the mug had left on the surface. She wasn't wrong. I had spent 18 months telling myself that this was about Eleanor, about justice, about doing the job I had been trained to do, applied to a situation I had personal standing in. All of that was true. But underneath it, deeper than the case files and the legal strategy and the careful documentation, was something I hadn't fully named until she said it out loud. I had needed to stop being the person they had assigned me to be. The one who was left out of the email chain. The one who didn't fit the image. The one who could be discarded and managed and written off without consequence. I had needed to show myself, not them myself, that story was not the final one. "Yeah," I said. "Maybe." She picked up her mug again. We sat there for a while without talking, which we had gotten good at over the week, the kind of quiet that doesn't require filling. Later, after she had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the case folder beside it, and I thought about what home had meant in my family. It had meant performance. It had meant meeting standards that shifted whenever I got close to them. It had meant a door that was technically open, but functionally conditional. I had spent a long time trying to earn a version of belonging that was never actually available to me from people who had decided before I could speak what role I would play. I closed the laptop. Home isn't where they accept you. It's where you stop needing them to. Eleanor was asleep in the next room. Michael was filing motions in Santa Barbara. Daniel was building a case in Honolulu. The trust was frozen. The house was safe. The truth was on record. I had spent my entire life being told I was the one who didn't belong. I had believed it for longer than I should have. But I had also, quietly, without anyone noticing, been becoming someone who knew exactly what to do when it mattered. And when the moment came, I was ready. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the one left off the list, told you were too much or not enough, asked to be smaller so someone else could look bigger, you already know that the hardest part isn't the fight. It's deciding you're worth fighting for. That decision, once made, changes everything. The rest is just documentation.